For almost 50 years, humanity was the galactic punchline, the new species so terrified of its own shadow, it never bothered to show up to the party. We're standing in the Great Hall of the Galactic Concord, a stunning chamber a mile long with a ceiling showing a live view of the cosmos. Representatives from 214 species are gathered. In charge is High Chancellor Morveth, her silver robes shimmering. At nearly 400 years old, she's seen everything, and for the last 60 of them, she's led this council in doing, well, not much of anything. That legacy of doing nothing was about to come back and bite them. Stick around, because the underdog everyone ignored is about to change the entire game. Her voice, instantly translated for all, boomed through the massive hall. "We will now begin the roll call," she announced, her tone dripping with boredom. "Let the record reflect attendance for the 47th Annual Summit." The names went on and on. The Authority Collective, here. The Belmathy Trade Union, present. Then, after nearly an hour, the system called a name that made the entire room go silent: Terran Confederation. In a flash, every eye, every sensor, every alien face swiveled toward a single empty chair in the observers section. For 47 years straight, that chair had been nothing more than a dust collector. From the moment humanity got their invite to the galactic stage, they had been a total no-show. Terran Confederation, the system repeated into the dead silence. Not a peep. A wave of stifled laughs and quiet jokes spread among the delegates. High Chancellor Morveth simply tapped her console. "Let the record show the Terran Confederation has once again declined to attend. We will proceed." But just as she was about to move on, a loud, barking laugh erupted from the upper tiers. It was Ambassador Breath of the Colossi Dominion, a massive, scaly creature whose skin was glowing a foul shade of dark purple, the color of pure disdain. "Why do we bother with this ridiculous charade?" he thundered, his voice practically oozing with scorn. "The humans are a pathetic species of primitives, cowering on their little dirt rock behind a single unremarkable star. They offer nothing of value to any of us." A few other representatives grumbled in agreement. To them, humans were just some backwater race from a boring part of the galaxy, found by a survey team 80 years ago and just as quickly dismissed. High Chancellor Morveth simply held up a hand to quiet them. "The invitation stands. It is a matter of protocol," she said flatly, her voice empty of all emotion. "Every species that achieves spaceflight is offered a place here. If the humans choose not to accept, it is their loss." And just like that, the subject was closed, the same way it was every single year. The summit then turned to the actual crisis, the Ricari hegemony. For 3 long decades, this savage warrior race had been on a bloody campaign of conquest, enslaving dozens of smaller civilizations and forcing millions into their ever-expanding war machine. Ambassador Karath of the Ricari just sat there, his scarred face a perfect picture of boredom, as delegate after delegate condemned his people's aggression. He'd heard these toothless threats before. "The conquered has to do something," begged the representative from the Salathi Republic. "We can't just stand by while entire cultures are wiped from existence." But Ambassador Breath, the same brute who had just mocked the humans, simply sneered. "And do what precisely? Declare total war? The cost in lives and ships would be catastrophic. We must stick to diplomacy." The Salathi representative shot back. "We've been trying diplomacy for 30 years. How many more worlds must burn before we admit it isn't working?" The pointless argument went on for hours. Ideas were brought up only to be shot down. Sanctions were deemed too weak to matter. A direct military attack was considered too risky and far too expensive. So in the end, the summit did what it always did. It drafted another strongly worded letter of condemnation. The Ricari ambassador took the document with a smug smirk, vowing that his government would give it all the attention it deserved. As he swaggered out of the hall, High Chancellor Morveth felt a familiar pain in her heart. 60 years she had held this position, and the script never changed. The strong did whatever they wanted, the weak suffered, and everyone else just wrote angry letters about it. That evening, Morveth was in her private chambers when her young aide, Torfth, rushed in. The summit went as expected, Morveth sighed. Another year, another colossal waste of everyone's time. Chancellor, Torfth said, his voice laced with anxiety, you need to see this. Our intelligence division has flagged some highly unusual activity in the outer territories. He handed her a data tablet. As Morveth read the report, her ancient eyes widened. It detailed multiple sightings of unknown ships in deep space, nowhere near any established trade routes. The vessels were colossal, bigger than any warship in the Conquered's entire fleet, and they moved with an elegance and speed that suggested technology far beyond their own. And any time a Conquered patrol ship got near, the mysterious ships would just vanish. These sightings go back 40 years, Morveth whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Why am I only just now learning of this? The reports were scattered, filed in different sectors by various crews over decades, Torfth explained. Nobody connected the dots until one analyst ran a deep-level pattern search. Chancellor, their flight paths. Every last one of them comes from the same point of origin. Morveth looked up, a cold dread washing over her. Where? Torfth took a deep breath. Human space. The tablet almost slipped from her fingers as the awful truth hit her like a physical blow. The humans, the primitives, the cowards. Who else has seen this? She demanded. No one, Chancellor. The analyst came directly to me and I came straight to you. Good. Keep it that way, Morveth ordered, her thoughts racing. She stared at the tablet again. These were not exploration ships. They were warships. I want round-the-clock hidden surveillance on human space. I want to know everything they're doing, but they can never know we're watching. I want a new report on my desk every single day. Yes, Chancellor. What do you think is happening? Morveth looked out her window toward the distant twinkling stars. I think, she said, her voice slow and deliberate, that we mistook their silence for fear. We thought their absence meant they were insignificant. She turned to face her assistant, a terrifying new idea forming in her mind. But what if we were dead wrong? A galaxy away, a young Conquered analyst named Yuki Tanaka was wondering the exact same thing. Her job was to monitor unimportant species, and humanity was at the top of that list. For 3 years, she'd been sifting through the most mind-numbingly boring data from Earth, but not anymore. It started with a simple question no one had ever bothered to ask. Why did the humans show up for their first 3 summits and then disappear forever? The official line was that they just weren't interested. But Yuki went digging in the old archives. She pulled up video logs from those initial meetings and watched the human observers. They didn't look bored at all. They looked utterly disgusted. Back then, the Conquered was debating how to handle the systematic annihilation of a species called the Melthari. The debate was painfully familiar. Endless speeches, passionate pleas, and zero actual action. The Melthari were completely wiped out while the Conquered was still trying to set a date for its next meeting about them. The humans watched it all, silently taking notes. Then they left, and they never returned. Yuki located their final official message. It was short, polite, and colder than deep space. The Terran Confederation thanks the Galactic Concord for its hospitality and respectfully declines all future participation. That was it. 80 years of radio silence. Yuki leaned back, her heart pounding. The humans weren't hiding. They were judging. They had sized up the most powerful body in the galaxy, dismissed it as a useless talking shop full of cowards, and walked away to prepare for a universe they now knew they had to face on their own. They weren't primitives. They were pupils. They had been watching this whole time, mapping the galaxy's major players, figuring out who the real dangers were and who was just all talk. The chilling question was, what were they planning to do with that knowledge? As she began to type her report, she had a sick feeling it would just be ignored like all the others. But a knot in her stomach told her this was different. Something big was about to break. Far away, in the cold, silent void between stars, a storm was gathering. 1,000 ships hung silently in space, a fleet built in total secrecy, its crews waiting with perfect, disciplined patience. The waiting had stretched on for a lifetime, but tonight it was finally over. From the bridge of her flagship, the Prometheus, Admiral Chen Wei stared out into the cosmos. At nearly 3 kilometers long, her ship had enough firepower to turn a small moon into gravel, but to Chen, it was simply home. She'd given 40 years of her life to the fleet, working her way up from a bright-eyed ensign to the supreme commander of humanity's entire military. And in all that time, she had never, not once, ordered a shot fired at another species. No human ever had. That was all about to change. Admiral, your final intelligence briefing is ready. Have you ever felt like you're the only one telling the truth in a room full of people who refuse to listen? That's how humanity has felt for the last 80 years. Admiral Chen was lost in the star-dusted blackness when her aide, Commander Marcus Webb, appeared at her side. He was young for his rank, not even 50, but his mind was a razor, and she trusted him completely. "It's time," Chen stated, her voice quiet. They stepped onto the bridge, a vast command deck that hummed with a calm, deadly energy. Her senior staff was already assembled, their expressions carved from granite. They knew what was on the line. The main view screen was replaying the galactic summit from 3 days prior. Chen watched the arrogant smirk on Ambassador Breath's face as he dismissed humanity's warnings, followed by the same old circular arguments about the Vicari Empire's latest atrocity, a conversation that, predictably, went absolutely nowhere. She'd been watching the same movie her entire career. "The same old song and dance," muttered Captain Reynolds, her second in command. "They talk, and worlds burn." "Not this time," Commander Webb countered, his voice a low hum. He flicked a command and the screen changed. It now showed a single, tiny space station, a lonely outpost in a system so far off the beaten path, it was almost a ghost story. "This is Sanctuary Station. Built 12 years ago, it was a secret refuge for anyone fleeing the Vicari. As of right now, 50,000 souls from more than 30 different species call it home." Chen was intimately familiar with Sanctuary. Human intelligence had been its silent guardian since the first foundation was laid. It was one of the last flickers of hope in a galaxy that was rapidly going dark. "The Vicari know where it is," Webb said, and the words fell with the force of anchors. "A battle group jumped from their home world 6 days ago. On their current course, they'll arrive in less than 18 hours. A thick, choking silence descended on the bridge. Every officer present knew the Vicari's reputation for dealing with refugee camps. It wouldn't be a battle. It would be an extermination. The lucky ones would die in the first volley. The survivors would be hauled away as slaves, and the station itself would be vaporized, a brutal message to the rest of the galaxy about the price of hope." "And what is the Concord's response?" Chen asked, already knowing the pathetic answer. "They've called for an emergency session to monitor the developing situation. If history is any guide, they'll spend a few days pointing fingers before issuing a strongly worded condemnation. By that point, 50,000 men, women, and children will have vanished." "Of course they will," Chen said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper as she scanned the faces of her command crew. She had served with these officers for decades. They were more than a crew, they were her family. Every one of them had drilled for this very scenario, knowing that a day like this was not a matter of if, but when. Still, there's a world of difference between knowing a storm is coming and feeling your home's foundation begin to splinter. "Before we proceed," she began, her voice suddenly sharp as a shard of ice, "I need to know that every single person in this room is 100% committed to the path we are about to take. No hesitation, no regrets." She strode to the holographic map glowing in the center of the bridge. It displayed the small cluster of stars representing the Terran Confederation, a forgotten little corner at the galaxy's edge. It looked almost pitiful next to the massive, sprawling empires that controlled everything. 80 years ago, a conquered scout ship stumbled upon Earth by sheer accident. We were just getting the hang of traveling within our own solar system. We were young, idealistic, and thrilled to learn we weren't alone out here. With a wave of her hand, the map pulled back, revealing the glittering, impossibly vast network of the galaxy. They invited us to join their grand civilization. They dangled all the marvels in front of us, the colossal trade hubs, the faster-than-light travel lanes, an alliance of 1,000 worlds. We sent our best and brightest, our most optimistic diplomats, eager to understand how such a massive, diverse society could coexist so peacefully. The hologram shifted, showing fuzzy, archival footage of those first human ambassadors, their faces filled with wonder. But what they found was a beautiful lie. We discovered a civilization that had accepted a certain level of evil as the cost of doing business. We saw powerful empires bully and crush smaller worlds, while the conquered conveniently looked the other way. We saw entire planets sold into slavery because no one wanted to upset their lucrative trade deals by stepping in. The display switched to images of the Melthari crisis, endless hollow debates in sterile chambers while a species was dying. The Melthari were systematically wiped out while the conquered formed subcommittees. 12 billion lives just gone, and all the conquered offered were their deepest condolences. Chen let the weight of that galactic failure settle in the room. And so, our ancestors made a choice. Yeah. We would never be a part of a system that allows monsters to roam unchallenged. We refused to join a club whose primary rule was to ignore the evil happening right next door. But we were also insignificant, powerless. If we had started a crusade pointing out all the injustice, they would have snuffed us out without a second thought. So we played the part, Captain Reynolds concluded for her. We played the part, Chen confirmed, but we were never idle. The hologram flickered, then resolved into humanity's greatest secret: shipyards hidden inside hollowed-out asteroids, research facilities floating in the crushing atmospheres of gas giants, military academies tucked away on moons everyone had written off as barren rock, an entire military, an entire fleet built from the ground up in total secrecy. For 80 years we prepared. We studied every species in the Concord. We learned their technologies, we charted their supply lines, and we identified every single one of their pressure points. We built a fleet capable of going toe-to-toe with any of the major powers. And then we waited. The display became a grim montage of intelligence photos, a catalog of the Vicari's cruelty. Being sold like livestock, labor camps that were little more than slow-motion executions, an entire world stripped down to bedrock. We watched the Vicari carve a path of suffering across the stars. We watched the conquered do nothing. And we took notes on every crime, waiting for the perfect moment, the one chance to finally make a stand. "Why did we wait so long?" a junior officer blurted out, his voice choked with a mix of fury and sorrow. "If we had this kind of strength, why did we let so many die?" Chen had asked herself that same question 1,000 times. The answer was a bitter pill to swallow. Because strength without wisdom is just another form of tyranny. If we had charged in, guns blazing, convinced we knew best, we would have just become the next great threat, the new bullies. She looked directly at the young man, her gaze filled with a profound, weary understanding. It is easy to wield a weapon. It is the hardest thing in the universe to wield it justly. We waited because we needed to be strong enough to win, but wise enough not to become the monsters we set out to destroy. The view screen shifted back to the live feed of Sanctuary Station, with the red icons of the Vicari fleet closing in like predators. In 18 hours, 50,000 people will be annihilated unless someone intervenes, and we all know the conquered isn't coming. Chen drew herself up, her voice now ringing with the clarity of a ship's bell. Today, humanity intervenes. Today, the galaxy learns who we truly are. We are not conquerors. We are not rulers. We are guardians. She turned to her communications officer. Signal the entire fleet. All ships prepare for immediate jump. We move in 12 hours. Ma'am, did you say the entire fleet? The officer's mouth hung open. That's over 1,000 warships. I'm aware of my ship count, Lieutenant. Yes, Admiral. Sending the order. Across all of human-controlled space, in hidden bases and secret starports, a sleeping giant began to stir. Engines ignited with a deep roar, weapon systems hummed to life, and crews raced to their battle stations. 1,000 ships, each a marvel of engineering the galaxy never knew existed, were about to make their debut. Chen returned to the main viewport, her eyes on the distant stars. Out there, 50,000 refugees were hoping for a miracle they had no reason to believe would come. They had no idea that help was already hurtling toward them at unimaginable speeds. They didn't know that a species they had probably never even heard of had been watching over them all this time. Commander Webb moved to stand beside her. Admiral, after this, everything changes. The entire galaxy will know what we're capable of. They're going to fear us. Let them, Chen replied softly. Fear can be a useful tool, but I hope they also learn to understand. Understand what, ma'am? That we didn't build this armada for conquest. We built it to be a shield. Every last ship, every weapon, every soldier in our fleet exists for a single purpose: to stand between the innocent and those who would do them harm. A sad little smile played on her lips. This galaxy has seen more than its share of empires. It's had enough corporate armies and political backstabbing. The one thing it's never had is a protector. She looked at Webb, her expression now pure steel. And that's what we are. That's the choice we made 80 years ago, not to be emperors, but to be guardians. Webb gave a slow nod, the sheer scale of what they were about to do finally hitting him. In 12 hours, we're flipping the entire galaxy on its head. First, she corrected him softly, we're going to save 50,000 lives. Then we'll let the galaxy shake, and we'll be there to help pick up the pieces. With a small nod, she accepted her fate. From this moment on, their future was a blank page they would have to write together. The hours crawled by. Chen reviewed battle strategies, checked in with her captains, and tried to find quiet moments, but sleep was a lost cause. Her thoughts were racing, focused on the incredible event that was about to happen, the exact moment 1,000 human warships would snap into existence and forever change the fate of the galaxy. Finally, the countdown reached 0. All ships are green, Commander Webb's steady voice came over the comms. The fleet is ready for the jump. Chen settled into her command chair, her gaze sweeping across the bridge one last time. Every single face she saw was a portrait of pure, focused resolve. Her crew was ready. Signal the fleet, she ordered, her voice as solid as a mountain. Make the jump. Can you even imagine it? Watching everything you've poured your heart into, a safe harbor for 50,000 souls who had nowhere else to turn, about to be vaporized into a cosmic tomb? That was the waking nightmare Station Master Priath was living, as 60 state-of-the-art warships closed in on her home. The Verkari battle group had shown up 2 hours early, and her tiny defense fleet, just a handful of converted cargo haulers and old patrol boats, was hopelessly, completely outmatched. For 80 years, humanity had been a ghost, a half-forgotten legend. But if you think you know how this story is going to end, you should probably stick around, because you're about to be proven very, very wrong. Priath felt the immense weight of her long life. Her scales, which once shimmered like jewels, had faded to a dull, dusty gray, and her heart ached with the ghosts of too many goodbyes. She had founded Sanctuary Station 12 years ago, hoping it could be a beacon of light for refugees running from the galaxy's endless wars. Now, it seemed it would only be their final resting place. The Verkari are demanding our unconditional surrender, her communications officer reported, his voice tight with fear. They're willing to accept the station's population as assets of the hegemony. He didn't need to spell out what that meant. He was offering slavery for 50,000 people who had already lost everything they had. Any word from the conquered? Priath asked, even though she already knew the answer was going to be grim. The Emergency Council is still deadlocked, ma'am. No decision has been made. Of course they hadn't. The politicians at the Concord would argue and make grand speeches while her people were being put in chains. It was the oldest story in the universe. The powerful take what they want, and the weak are left to suffer the consequences. "Tell the Verkari we require time to consider their generous offer," Priath said, a desperate move to buy just a few more seconds. It was a pointless gesture, and she knew it. It wouldn't change the outcome, but it might give a few children time to scramble into an escape pod, or a few families one last moment to hold each other. Aboard the Verkari flagship, the Dominance, Fleet Commander Torax let out a soft, amused chuckle. He'd seen this pathetic little play a dozen times before. The desperate plea for more time was always a tasty little appetizer before the main course of total conquest. "They're asking for more time," his second-in-command reported with a sneer. "Give them 10 minutes, Torax said with a lazy wave of his hand. "Then, start the assault. I want this station under our control before the Concord finally grows a spine and decides to do something." His officers all shared a laugh. The very idea was ridiculous. Torax leaned back in his chair, watching the station on his main view screen. It just hung there in the darkness like a cornered animal, surrounded by his pack of hungry wolves. Soon, it would all belong to him. The useful refugees would be shipped off to labor camps. The rest would be disposed of. It was just another Tuesday for the hegemony. "Commander," his sensor technician suddenly cut in, his voice strained. "I'm picking up something weird." "Define weird," Torax grumbled, his pleasant mood instantly vanishing. "There are massive energy spikes appearing at the edge of the system. A whole lot of them. I've never seen a hyperspace signature like this before." Torax shot upright in his chair, his amusement completely gone. The readings were off the charts, appearing just outside the effective range of his best scanners. "How many contacts are we looking at?" he demanded. The technician swallowed nervously, his face going pale. "Commander, the system is tracking over 1,000 individual signatures." "That's not possible." "I'm running diagnostics right now, sir," the officer stammered, his fingers flying across his console. "Commander, they're resolving now. They're ships, 1,000 ships on a direct path toward us, and they're moving at an insane speed." Before Torax could even process those words, the universe outside his viewport ripped itself apart. 1,000 points of light bloomed in the empty void as ship after ship tore through the fabric of space, snapping into a perfect geometric battle formation. They were colossal, making even his mighty cruisers look like children's toys, and they moved with a silent, synchronized grace that spoke of technology centuries beyond his own. "What in the stars is that?" Torax screamed. "Identify them!" "They're not in any known database, Commander. Their design doesn't match anything we have on record." The sensor officer's voice was trembling with pure terror. "They're forming a sphere around our fleet and the station. They're boxing us in." 1,000 warships created a perfect cage of metal and light, their weapon ports sliding open, with every single one aimed directly at his fleet. Torax had never seen such a display of absolute power. No one in the galaxy had a fleet this big or this advanced. Just then, his communications channel came to life. A voice, calm and clear, spoke in perfect galactic standard. "This is Admiral Chen Wei of the Terran Defense Fleet." For the first time in his long and celebrated career, Torax felt the cold, icy grip of real fear. Humans. "We are not here to negotiate," the voice went on, as cold and empty as the space between stars. "We are not here to talk about politics. We are here because 50,000 people are about to be enslaved or murdered, and somebody had to do something about it. Verkari commanders, you have 10 minutes to power down your weapons and exit this system. If you comply, you will be allowed to leave unharmed. You will not get a second chance." The channel went silent. Torax could only stare, completely stunned. Humans. The primitive species that had been hiding out in some forgotten corner of the galaxy for 80 years. The very same species everyone had written off as a footnote in history. They had built this. 1,000 ships, an unbreakable cage constructed around his entire battle group. They were terrifyingly beautiful, machines built for one single purpose: total war. They could have turned his fleet into dust without saying a single word, but instead, they were offering him a way out. For a split second, Torax actually considered taking it. Living to fight another day was always the smart play. But then he remembered the laws of the hegemony. Returning in failure, even with his fleet intact, would mean a slow, public execution for him and his entire family line. He would rather die right here. "All ships, prepare to engage," he ordered, his voice cracking just a little. "Target the lead human vessel. Let's show these primitives how the hegemony deals with anyone who gets in our way." His officers looked at him like he was completely insane, but years of brutal discipline took over, and the Verkari fleet began to slowly maneuver into attack position. On the bridge of the human flagship, Admiral Chen watched them move. She wasn't surprised. Arrogance was a fatal disease. "All ships, weapons free," she said, her voice perfectly calm. "Disable them. Do not destroy them. We need their crews alive." And with that, the battle began. And 4 minutes and 23 seconds later, it was over. It wasn't a battle. It was a surgical operation. The human fleet moved as one single entity, an orchestra playing a silent symphony of precision energy beams. They didn't fire missiles or plasma rounds. They fired lances of light that surgically carved through and deactivated critical systems. Engines sputtered and died. Weapon arrays went dark. Shield generators let out one last pathetic hum before fading to nothing. One after another, 60 of the hegemony's most fearsome warships were turned into helpless, drifting tombs. Not a single ship was destroyed. The Dominance was the last to fall silent. Torax watched in absolute shock as his bridge went dark, the red emergency lights painting long, grim shadows on the walls. His weapons were offline. His engines were dead. A lone voice sliced through the dead air of his bridge. "Fleet Commander Torax." Admiral Chen's voice was calm, yet final. "Your ships are dead in the water. We're taking your crews into custody and sending medical teams for your wounded. Let's be crystal clear about this. Your little crusade is over." The line went dead. Torax collapsed into his command chair, a completely broken man. His entire armada taken apart in less than 5 minutes without a single human life lost. What in the stars had they been building out there in the dark? On Sanctuary Station, Priyeth stared at the tactical screen, her vision blurred by tears. The Verkari warships were just dark, silent hulks, floating uselessly inside a cage of human vessels. And from that cage, dozens of smaller ships were now launching. Not to strike a killing blow, but heading straight for the disabled enemy ships, their lights blinking the universal signal for medical help. The voice of her comms officer was shaky. "Station Master, we have a hail. It's from the human flagship." "Put it on the main screen now," she ordered. The image of an older woman appeared, her hair streaked with silver and her eyes holding a deep, unshakable calm. "Station Master, I am Admiral Chen Wei. Sanctuary Station is now secure. We are deploying humanitarian ships to the area to offer any help you may need. Do not be alarmed by our fleet." Priyeth tried to form a word, but her throat felt like it was sealed shut. The one question that burned inside her finally broke free. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why are you helping us?" Admiral Chen offered a smile that was so full of genuine warmth it was stunning. "Because someone had to, because we could, and because this is who we are." "But you don't owe us a thing," Priyeth protested. "We're not your people." "Starting today, you are," Chen replied with a gentle finality. "Get some rest, Station Master. We've got you from here." The screen went dark. Priyeth sank back into her command chair, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she let the tears come. For 12 long years, she had broadcast the desperate pleas of her refugees into an empty void, answered only by the cold silence of the galaxy. For 12 years, she had pleaded with the conquered for help that was never sent. And now, out of the deepest black, help had just arrived. It didn't make any sense, and a part of her was sure it never would. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt a tiny spark of something she thought had died forever. Hope. Light years away, on Velithos Prime, the Concord's emergency meeting had descended into total chaos. The news had just hit, and the delegates were in shock, completely unable to wrap their minds around what had just happened. Can you imagine being told your very right to exist has been canceled? That was the nightmare facing 50,000 refugees, cornered and just moments away from being erased by a fleet of 1,000 warships from the merciless Vicari hegemony. But just as their shields were about to give out, the impossible happened. A mysterious fleet warped into existence, disabling the entire enemy armada in just a few minutes with technology so advanced it made the galaxy's most powerful ships look like toys. So here's the question. Are these newcomers here to save the day, or are they an even scarier threat? Stick with me to find out what happened next. Inside the Galactic Council, Ambassador Vareth's scales were practically vibrating with pure rage. "This is an act of war," he roared. "The humans attacked a hegemony fleet without any provocation." The Salathi representative shot back, "No provocation? Your ships were about to slaughter 50,000 souls. Those refugees were harboring our enemies. We had every right." "You had no right to do anything," a voice cut through the chaos, silencing the entire room. High Chancellor Morveth stood at the central podium, her silver robes shimmering in the light. Her face was a perfect picture of calm, but her eyes burned with a fire that extinguished every argument in the chamber. "For 80 years, we ignored the humans," she stated, her voice carrying to every corner. "We wrote them off as primitives, as nobodies. We took their silence as a sign of weakness." She let that hang in the air for a moment. We were wrong. With a simple tap on her console, the main screen flickered to life, showing classified footage from Concord spy drones, 1,000 ghostly ships appearing from nowhere, the entire Vicari fleet rendered completely powerless in minutes, and then footage of human medics treating the very same enemy soldiers they had just defeated. "The humans have now shown us exactly what they're capable of," Morveth said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And now we must decide what to do next. But before you all start screaming at each other again, I want you to consider something." Her gaze swept across the chamber, landing on the faces of delegates from 100 different worlds. The humans could have vaporized the Vicari fleet. They chose to disable it. They could have left those crews to suffocate in the cold of space. They chose to save them. The weight of her words settled over the room, creating a thick, stunned silence. Whatever the humans are, whatever their grand plan is, they are not like us. They don't follow our rules. And maybe, she added, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper, that's precisely what this broken galaxy needs. A new wave of arguments exploded in the chamber, but Morveth wasn't listening. She was already focused on her next step, arranging a face-to-face meeting with an admiral named Chen and kicking off a new era for a galaxy that had just been turned on its head. The humans were done hiding. They had just put the entire galaxy on notice, and they did it in a huge way. Aboard the human carrier, Mercy, the medical bay was an oasis of quiet, the only sounds being the gentle beeps of medical monitors. In bed after bed lay wounded Vicari soldiers, their injuries treated, their pain managed, their lives saved by the very people they had been sent to annihilate. Lieutenant Kareth was one of them, staring up at the ceiling, trying to process the impossible. Just 12 hours ago, he was prepping to lead a bombing run on that refugee station. Now, he was a prisoner of war, being offered a glass of water by his enemy. A human woman approached his bed. She was smaller than he was, with warm brown skin and hands that moved with a gentle, expert confidence. She wore a medic's uniform and held a tray with a bowl of steaming soup. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her galactic standard accent flawless. Karath didn't respond immediately, his mind racing to find any logic in the situation. His warship had been completely shut down, its life support failing. He had braced himself for the end. Instead, Human rescue crews had sliced through his ship's hull and pulled him from the wreckage. "Why?" he finally managed to say, his throat raw from the smoke. "Why, what?" she replied gently. "Why save me? I'm your enemy. My orders were to wipe out everyone on that station." He paused, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "We would have killed you too." The human medic set the tray down and pulled a chair over to his bedside. "You were following orders," she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "You were doing what your government told you to. That doesn't make it right, but it doesn't make you a monster." "That's not a real answer," he shot back, his voice a low, angry growl. "No," she conceded, pausing for a moment. "I guess it's not. The real answer is, we help people because that's who we chose to be. We built this fleet to defend those who can't defend themselves. That's true. But we also built it knowing that the soldiers on the other side are people too. You have families. You have people who care about you. Your life has value." Karath could only shake his head slowly, finding it impossible to believe what he was hearing. The hegemony would never show this kind of mercy. If your ships were floating out here, dead in space, our medics wouldn't be saving you. Your survivors would be put in chains or worse. "I know," she said simply. "Then why?" he pressed, his voice almost begging for an explanation. "Because we are not you." The words were simple, but they struck him with the force of a physical blow. "We could be," she continued. "We have more than enough firepower to take whatever we want, but we chose a different path. We chose to be better." Karath was silent for a very long time. His entire life, he'd been taught that strength was control, that power was about dominating your enemies, and that mercy was a weakness just waiting to be exploited. And now, lying in an enemy sickbay, being cared for by a species he was supposed to despise, his entire universe was collapsing. "What happens to us now?" he finally asked. "You'll be cared for here until the diplomats sort things out. Then you'll be sent home to your people. No one will be harmed. No one will be mistreated." She stood up and pointed to the tray she had brought. "You should try to eat. You'll need your strength to recover." As she turned to check on another one of his crewmates, Karath was left alone with his thoughts in a bowl of hot soup that smelled, to his utter astonishment, unbelievably good. Meanwhile, on the far side of the galaxy, High Chancellor Morvth's shuttle was making its final approach to the human flagship, the Prometheus. She had demanded this meeting personally, brushing aside the frantic protests of her advisors. Admiral Chen had agreed without hesitation. The shuttle bay of the Prometheus was awe-inspiring, large enough to swallow a dozen of her own capital ships. As her shuttle landed, she saw a delegation waiting for her. Their crisp, clean uniforms, a stark contrast to the chaos back in her own government. Admiral Chen stood before them, shorter than High Chancellor Morvth had imagined, yet she carried an air of solid confidence that demanded your attention. "High Chancellor," Chen said, extending her hand in the classic human way. "Welcome aboard." Morvth carefully accepted the gesture, her mind quickly replaying the cultural briefings she'd received. "Admiral Chen, I appreciate you making time for me. The Conquered needs answers." Chen offered a faint smile. "After 80 years of radio silence, I'm sure you have a long list of questions." "You have no idea," Morvth admitted. The Admiral guided her through the colossal vessel to a private conference room. It was starkly simple, featuring a plain table in the middle and a single massive window that looked out into the star-dusted blackness of space. There were no guards, not a weapon in sight. It was just the two of them, two leaders sitting across from one another. "Go ahead, ask," Chen invited. Morvth sat down, her thoughts a tangled mess of the hundreds of questions she'd prepared. She had rehearsed this meeting for days, but in that moment, only the simplest question seemed to matter. "Why did you stay hidden?" she finally asked. "Your technology is centuries beyond ours. You could have taken over the entire galaxy right from the start. Why operate in the shadows for so long?" A trace of sadness touched Chen's smile. "Because we were there for your council meetings 80 years ago. We watched, we listened, and we saw endless debates that solved nothing while entire civilizations were left to collapse. We saw the powerful preying on the weak, while your so-called alliance did nothing but observe. We took one look at that fundamentally broken system, she said, her eyes now glinting with a fierce light, and we wanted no part of it. So you just cut yourselves off from the galaxy? Morph pushed back. No, we got ready. There's a world of difference, Chen corrected her gently. If we had come out with our weapons drawn before we truly understood the galaxy, before we had the wisdom to handle our own power, we would have just become another empire. We'd have been conquerors, not protectors. That's the inevitable outcome when strength isn't guided by principle. So what is it you want now? To create something new, something better, Chen stated plainly. A galaxy where the strong actually protect the weak instead of feeding on them. A government where talking leads to real action, where we finally stop ignoring suffering just because it's convenient. Morph weighed her words. They were beautiful, but she'd heard beautiful words before. How do we know you won't just force this new order on everyone? Your fleet is strong enough to take apart the conquered by lunchtime tomorrow. You're right, we could, Chen conceded, her voice as steady as a mountain. But we won't. We didn't spend 80 years building this fleet just to become the galaxy's new top bullies. We built it to be a shield. A shield for who? Morvith asked, unable to hide her skepticism. For everyone, Chen answered simply. Every species, every planet, every single person who can't defend themselves. This galaxy has had more than enough empires. It's had alliances built on pure greed. What it has never had is a power that exists for one reason and one reason only, to defend the defenseless. For a beat, Morvith was utterly silent. In her very long career, she'd listened to countless leaders make countless promises, most of them hollow. But the fire she saw in Admiral Chen's eyes felt so genuine, it dared her to believe. What are you asking the conquered for? She finally managed to ask. A partnership, Chen replied instantly. Not your submission, not a tribute, not our control, a genuine partnership. We want to join forces with anyone who believes that with immense power comes an even greater responsibility. She rose and walked over to the viewport, her gaze lost in the infinite field of stars. The Vicari aren't just going to give up. This loss will only make them angrier. They will rebuild, and they will return. The only way to finally break this cycle is to forge an alliance so strong that the mere idea of starting a war becomes unthinkable. We're proposing a new coalition, one that's open to any species willing to commit to its core principles. Humanity would be just one member among equals, not the one in charge. We have zero interest in telling anyone else how to live their lives. Morvith joined Chen at the window, staring out into the profound star-flecked darkness. An endless ocean of light, and every single one was a world, a civilization, a hope. You know, don't you, that some of the worlds you just defeated will never, ever trust you, she said quietly. They will always look at you as a threat, no matter what you say. I know, and that will be up to them. We won't force anyone to join us, but we also won't allow anyone to keep playing the old game of exploitation. The era of standing by while the innocent get crushed is over. That sounds an awful lot like an ultimatum. Think of it more as a line we've drawn in the stardust. We've made up our minds about what we will and will not tolerate. Now, it's time for everyone else to decide where they stand. Morvith turned, looking Chen squarely in the eye. I've been High Chancellor for 60 years. I have seen the conquered promise greatness and deliver absolutely nothing, again and again. I've watched entire species get hauled away into slavery while we debated the correct paperwork for filing a protest. I've despised myself for being so utterly powerless to change any of it. She drew a deep, unsteady breath, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I can trust you, Admiral. I don't know if your dream is even achievable, but I know for a fact that the old way is broken beyond all repair. And if there's even a tiny chance that we can build something better, I have to be part of it. A warm, genuine smile finally bloomed on Chen's face. Then let's get started. 3 days later, Admiral Chen addressed the Galactic Concord. The Grand Assembly Hall was filled to capacity. Every known species had sent a representative. The tension in the room was so thick you could almost taste it. Some delegates stared at Chen with raw terror in their eyes. Others looked at her with a small, fragile flicker of hope, but the majority just looked completely and totally lost. Chen stood at the central podium by herself, unarmed, prepared to face the judgment of an entire galaxy. "I know you have questions," she began, her voice calm and clear. "I know you're afraid. A new power has emerged from the shadows, with technology you don't understand and motives you can only guess at. If I were in your position, I would be scared too." Her eyes swept across the vast chamber, making contact with as many delegates as she could. "So let me tell you who we are. 80 years ago, humanity learned we weren't alone in the universe. You invited us to join your great civilization, so we dispatched observers to watch and learn from you. And what we saw absolutely broke our hearts." The massive view screen behind her lit up, displaying images that many in the hall had spent years trying to forget. The Malari famine, the pointless, drawn-out debates, the species that simply disappeared while the conquered did nothing. We watched 12 billion people starve to death while this body debated an appropriate response. We watched the Ricari enslave millions while you argued about sanctions. We saw one preventable tragedy after another, and so we made a choice. Chen's voice became as hard as diamond. "We swore to ourselves that we would never be part of a system that allowed such atrocities. But we also swore that when we finally stepped into the light, we would not become the very same monsters we sought to oppose." She gestured, and the screen shifted to footage from the battle at Sanctuary Station. The 1,000 human ships, the entire Ricari fleet neutralized in minutes, and human medics tending to their wounded enemies. We built our fleet to serve as a shield for the innocent. We built it with enough power to overwhelm any force that preys on the vulnerable. But we also built it with the discipline to show mercy, to save lives when it would have been far easier to just annihilate them. That is who we are. That is our creed. Chen paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the silent assembly. "I'm not here to make threats. I'm not here to demand your allegiance. I'm here to present you with a choice. You can continue on your current path, arguing while innocent people suffer, maintaining a system that protects the powerful by grinding the weak to dust, or you can join us, and together we can build something new." "And what exactly is this proposal of yours?" shouted Ambassador Breath from the floor. His voice was laced with poison, but Chen could hear the tremor of fear beneath it. "A coalition open to any species that commits to its foundational principles, that the strong have a duty to defend the weak, that aggression will not be stood for, and that suffering will be met with decisive action, not hollow words. Humanity will be one voice among many, not the masters of this new alliance. We are looking for partners, not servants. And if we say no, then you say no. We won't force a single soul to join, but we will not stand by and watch the old ways continue. If another species is being threatened, if another people are facing slavery or extinction, we are going to step in, with or without the conquered's approval." The chamber exploded into a furious roar, but Chen just stood there, waiting with absolute patience for the noise to fade. "You have 80 years of our silence to think about," she said finally. 80 years while humanity watched and learned and got ready. We could have shown our hands sooner. We chose to wait until we were positive we could do this the right way. She scanned the hall one last time. "Now, we're ready. The only question is, are you?" With that, she stepped down from the podium and walked straight out of the grand hall, leaving 200 species to argue about a future that had already begun. The galaxy was never going to be the same. A year had passed since the fight at Sanctuary Station, and the galactic map had been completely rewritten. The Ricari hegemony was simply gone. Not because humanity wiped it out, but because its own oppressed people rose up. As soon as the conquered world saw that fighting back was a real possibility, once they knew a power existed that would have their back, they found a courage they thought had been beaten out of them for good. One world after another threw off the chains of their masters. The colossal empire rotted from the inside out, leaving the Ricari to finally pay for centuries of cruelty. The The galactic concord itself had fallen apart. Some species clung to the old ways, hiding in their home systems and just hoping this massive tidal wave of change would pass them by. While most of the galaxy was scrambling to sign up with the new alliance humanity had built, publicly claiming ideals they had privately ignored for centuries, Admiral Chen Wei was looking at the real results. She stood on an observation deck of a station orbiting the planet they now called New Dawn. Just 6 months ago, this world had been a Vicari mining colony, a horrifying labor camp filled with the enslaved people of a dozen different species. Now, it was a sanctuary. It was a place where beings who had known nothing but agony could finally start to heal and put their lives back together. Human volunteers were working shoulder to shoulder with people from every corner of the galaxy, building homes, schools, and clinics from the dust. Doctors and nurses were treating injuries that some of these survivors had carried for decades, while teachers were helping children learn to read and write in their own languages for the very first time. For 3 generations, her family had known nothing but chains. Her grandmother died in the mines. Her mother was worked until her body gave out, and she was born into that same horrible slavery. But her children would be born free. So how did one person, leading a single fleet, manage to tear down a galactic empire that had ruled with an iron fist for centuries? It's a story about a totally different kind of power, and it might just change the way you see everything. Stick around to find out what happened. The revolution kicked off with 2 things the vicious hegemony had outlawed: compassion and mercy. Commander Webb came to stand next to Admiral Chen at the window, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the last one. They all had. It turned out that building something new was way harder than tearing something old down. "The Salathi Republic just made it official," he said. "They've joined the coalition. That brings us to 47 species. That's good news. Any holdouts?" The usual crowd. Ambassador Breath is still trying to stir up trouble, but no one's listening to him anymore. And the Colossi Dominion is too wrapped up in its own internal power grabs to even notice us. Chen gave a small nod. She had always figured there would be some resistance. What she never expected was how fast the whole rotten structure would come crashing down once the first brick was knocked loose. "There's one other thing," Webb added. "Former Fleet Commander Torax is asking for a meeting. He was released and sent back to his people, but he claims he has something important he needs to tell you." Now, that was a shock. Torax was the commander who had led the assault on Sanctuary Station. His capture had been the turning point of that whole battle. "What's it about?" He wouldn't say. Only that he came all this way to ask you in person. Chen thought about it for a second. "Bring him to my office. Let's see what he has to say." 30 minutes later, Torax walked into Chen's office. He was a mere shadow of the man he used to be, looking much thinner than he had a year ago. The brilliant shimmer of his scales had faded to a dull, flat finish, and the suffocating arrogance that once poured off him was completely gone. Defeat had reforged him right down to his very soul. "Admiral Chen," he said, his voice tight but filled with a reluctant respect. "Thank you for seeing me." "Former Commander," Chen motioned to a chair. "Please, sit." Torax sank into the chair with a deep sigh that seemed to carry the full weight of a fallen empire. He stared down at his hands for a long moment, like he was trying to find the right words. "I spent my whole life believing in the hegemony's cause," he started. "I was raised to believe that strength was the only thing that mattered, that power was meant to be used, and that the strong had a God-given right to rule the weak. I ended lives for that belief. I conquered worlds for it. I enslaved countless innocent people because I was so sure that was just how the universe was meant to be." He finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "And then you wiped out my entire fleet in less than 4 minutes without a single casualty on my ships. You captured me, and then you treated my injuries. You gave me food and water, and you spoke to me like I was an actual person, not just a prisoner of war." "You are a person, Torax," Chen said, her voice soft but firm. "That's the whole point. I never understood that The very idea that you could show dignity to an enemy, that you could win without being cruel, that you could have all that power and choose to show mercy, it was completely foreign to me. Torax shook his head, still looking baffled by the memory. During my time as your prisoner, all I did was think. I thought about every life I had destroyed, every world I had broken, every monstrous thing I had done in the name of the hegemony. And I realized I had wasted my entire life serving a lie. Chen stayed quiet, letting him get it all out. She had seen this before with other Vicari prisoners, their entire worldview shattering after their first real taste of basic human decency. It was moments like these that gave her true hope for the future they were all trying to build. Torax's voice was thick with emotion as he continued. The hegemony is gone. My people are broken, scattered to the stars. The only thing we have left is our shame. He seemed to sit up a little straighter then, a spark of the old general returning to his eyes. But I've started to think that shame can be the ground where something better can grow. I am here to offer my assistance to your coalition. Chen was genuinely taken by surprise. To do what exactly? She asked. Anything you need, he replied. I know Vicari military strategy inside and out. I know where they stash their weapons, who the war criminals are that slipped away, and every dark secret the hegemony kept locked away even from its own high command. He paused, taking a heavy breath. And I can talk to the other Vicari, he added. The ones who are just drifting now, totally lost, with no clue how to live in a galaxy that isn't all about conquest. I can be the living proof that there's another path forward. Chen watched the old warrior, sizing him up. She had become an excellent judge of character over the years, and what she saw in his eyes was pure, raw honesty. His old arrogance had been incinerated by his defeat and the quiet reflection that came after. In its place was a man desperate to make up for his past. You realize that many species will never forgive the Vicari for what they did, right? She said gently. You may have to spend the rest of your life being hated for crimes you can never undo. I know, he answered, but I have to try. I have to do something, anything to help make things right, even if the scales can never truly be balanced again. He looked her straight in the eye. I learned one of your human sayings, the one about the longest journey starting with a single step. A small smile touched Chen's lips. Yes, we have one like that. Then let this be my first step, Torax said. Whatever you ask, whatever I can do to help, I'm ready. I'm not here asking you to forgive me. I'm here asking for a chance to earn it. Chen was silent for a long moment, considering his words. Finally, she gave him a slow, measured nod. We have a program for former hegemony soldiers who want to help rebuild. You'll start at the very bottom. You'll be taking orders, not giving them. You'll be doing manual labor, whatever's needed. It's not a glamorous position. I wouldn't expect it to be. In that case, welcome to the coalition, Torax, Model 10. For 100 years, the galaxy suffered under the heel of a brutal empire, while humanity just watched from the sidelines. What would you do if you had the power to stop a monster, but you knew that using it might turn you into one too? That was the choice humanity faced. Stick with me, because their answer is not what you'd expect, and it starts right here, at a small community party on a planet called New Dawn, 1 year after the war was won. A young woman, whose people were nearly wiped off the galactic map, nervously approached Admiral Chen. Her voice trembled as she said, My family were slaves for 3 generations. My grandmother died in the mines. My mother was worked to death. I was born in chains. Tears streamed down her face. Because of you, my children will be born free. But after her thank you, she asked the question that haunted everyone. Is it true you could have saved us sooner? Why did you wait? Chen looked out at the crowd, at former enemies now sharing a meal, and gave the young woman the honest, painful truth. Yes, she said softly. We could have intervened much, much earlier. She explained that if they had stormed in with their warships a century ago, they would have just been another conquering army. We had to take that time, Chen explained, to figure out how to be powerful enough to save the galaxy without becoming the very evil we were fighting. That quiet answer was humanity's real secret weapon. It wasn't the 1,000 warships they arrived with. It was the century of soul-searching that came before. That evening, as Chen walked through the new town, seeing families heading home under the soft glow of streetlights, she saw the proof that their choice was the right one. This new alliance was far from perfect, and the road ahead would be tough, with old hatreds trying to claw their way back to the surface. But for the first time, there was real progress. As the first stars appeared, Chen headed back to her ship, her schedule for the next day already packed. The work of building a better galaxy was endless, but this is what true hope felt like. For ages, the galaxy had been ruled by fear and greed. It never had a real guardian, a power dedicated to protecting the weak instead of preying on them. But now, it finally did. What if a ruthless mega-corporation was choking the life from your planet, and the government paid to protect you was just cashing their checks? That was the terrifying situation for the Krill people. And the one person who stumbled onto the truth wasn't a hero or a super soldier, but Ensign Eva Rostova, a junior supply officer whose life was a sea of spreadsheets. Her only order was to mind her own business. But Eva couldn't ignore the truth. If you've ever felt like one small person against a hopelessly broken system, you need to hear what she did next, because it shows how one person with enough courage can change everything. Eva's job was tracking cargo, not fighting empires, but she'd befriended the kind, insect-like krill who traded at her station. She learned about the beautiful, hand-carved chimes they made, realizing each one wasn't just an object, but a family's entire life story etched into crystal. Then, one day, she discovered a hidden message proving the corporation wasn't just polluting their world. It was a systematic plan to wipe them out. When she tried to report it, her files were erased and her system access was cut off. Her own captain was on the payroll. She was totally alone, or so it seemed. In a moment of despair, she found a hidden compartment in a broken chime a friend had given her. Inside was a tiny data crystal with a mind-blowing reveal. The krill weren't primitive at all. They were an ancient post-technology race that had willingly given up their advanced tools. The crystal didn't just hold proof of the corporation's crimes. It contained the plans for a revolutionary clean energy that would make the company obsolete. Knowing the council was corrupt, Eva found an old-school comms dish and broadcast everything to every news outlet in the galaxy. The fallout was immediate. The corporation's stock flatlined, its executives were arrested on a live feed, and their government cronies were exposed. The krill, finally safe, shared their technology freely, kicking off a new era of prosperity. And Eva, the quiet officer who just tracked supplies, became a galactic hero, proving that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its warships, but its conscience. And for the first time ever, a seat on the Galactic Council was offered not to a warrior or a diplomat, but to a humble ensign who taught everyone that true power isn't about the weapons you have, but the courage to do what's right.